I was born under a name I wasn't supposed to carry. My mother told me that when I arrived, 2 men in long black coats stood outside the hospital for 7 hours. They never came inside, never spoke to staff. They just watched. She always said they were Vatican observers, but laughed like it was a joke. I never did. I turned 25 last week. That's when the letter arrived. No return address. No stamp. Just my full name, Dominic Ezra Varelli, written in ink that looked like it had bled into the paper. It smelled faintly of incense and old dust. Inside was a single sheet, yellowed and brittle, typed in Latin. But the part one understood was the signature. Ordo Malum Custodientis. The Order of Evil Containment. I'd never heard of it. But I knew it had something to do with the Vatican. The seal at the bottom was unmistakable, gold cross over a 7-eyed serpent. I'd seen that symbol once before. In a dream. The letter wasn't just a warning. It was a record. My name was listed on something called the Lignum Vitae, the Tree of Life, they called it. But this wasn't a list of saints or miracle workers. It was a ledger of anomalies. Humans who weren't supposed to exist. Births that were either accidents of fate or mistakes the church tried to correct. And I was on it. I took the letter to my godfather, Matteo. He used to be a church historian in Rome before he mysteriously left the clergy and disappeared into the hills of Umbria. He lived alone, surrounded by dusty books, old radios, and paintings of archangels. When he read the letter, his face lost color. "You weren't supposed to get this," he said quietly. "Why not?" "Because you weren't supposed to live long enough to read it." He told me the Vatican once kept a secret archive, deeper than even the Apostolic Library. A place called Sotto Zero, Zero Below. The coldest floor of the Vatican, sealed beneath the catacombs, where they kept documents considered too dangerous for history. The Lignum Vitae was part of that. A list of children marked at birth by prophecy, possession, or unnatural coincidence. Many were killed in infancy. Others disappeared mysteriously before adulthood. And all of them had something in common. They weren't supposed to reach their 25th birthday. I asked Matteo why I was listed. He hesitated, then said, "Because something entered your mother's hospital room the night you were born." I didn't know what to believe. But that night, I dreamed of the serpent again. Only this time, it had 7 eyes, and all of them opened. I didn't sleep well after the dream. Not just because of the serpent with 7 eyes, but because it spoke this time. Not in words. Not exactly. It sang. A hymn in a language I didn't recognize, echoing like cathedral bells underwater. I woke up with dried blood under my nose and the words Malum Novum etched into the condensation on my bedroom mirror. When I showed Matteo the words, he didn't hesitate. He pulled a rusted lockbox from under his bed and opened it with a key he wore around his neck. Inside was a collection of old Vatican documents, brittle and scorched on the edges. He flipped through them until he pulled out a folded parchment sealed in wax with the same 7-eyed serpent from the letter. It was a surveillance report. The subject, me, dated 2 weeks before I was born. It detailed anomalous activity surrounding my mother during her final trimester. Candle wax burning in reverse. Electrical interference during sonograms. Priests reporting visions of smoke and flame during Mass. At the bottom of the report was a stamped approval for early intervention. It had never been carried out. The name of the person who blocked the operation? Father Armand Vero. Matteo whispered the name like it tasted bitter. He was part of the inner ring, he said. One of the keepers of the 9th seal. I didn't know what that meant, but Matteo explained. Inside Vatican intelligence, there's a lesser-known faction, the Custodes Nonati, or Guardians of the Unborn. They identify spiritual threats before they're born and carry out silent exorcisms, sometimes even divine terminations. Armand Vero was one of their elite. But in my case, he refused to act. He saved me. Or, he condemned me. I needed to find him. Matteo warned me that Armand hadn't been seen in over a decade. He went missing after a failed containment in Prague. He's either dead, Matteo said, or worse, silenced by the order. But I had a clue. In the margin of the Vatican report, scribbled in red ink, was a symbol I recognized from one of my earliest childhood drawings, a man in a cassock with no face, standing beside a red tree. I thought I made it up as a child. Apparently not. Matteo stared at the drawing for a long time, then said, "If Armand's alive, that's where he'll be." "Where?" He looked at me with eyes heavy with dread. "Beneath the monastery in Prague, where they buried the red collar." I packed that night. Whatever was haunting me wasn't just a dream. It was real. Documented. Avoided. Feared. And if the church had tried to erase me, I needed to know why I was spared, and what price that protection carried. The serpent was awake now, and I could hear the hymn again, only louder. I arrived in Prague under heavy rain. The airport was gray, faceless, forgettable. I blended in like I always had, moving through security, checking into a hostel under a different name. It was instinct by now. My father had taught me to move like a shadow, just in case they ever came looking. The monastery wasn't listed on any map. Not officially. But Matteo had given me a name, Castel Ticehos Nemini, Church of the Silent Sign. Locals didn't speak of it, and when they did, their eyes shifted elsewhere. They called it cursed. "The church with no bells," one driver whispered. "We don't go there after dark." I went at dusk. It sat at the edge of a forgotten district, behind barbed fences and collapsed walls. The roof had partially caved in, and moss devoured the ancient stone. But the symbol was still there, faint, carved above the arched entrance. The red tree. I stepped inside. Dust choked the air. The pews were rotten and split. A single candle burned at the altar, untouched by wind or time. But what drew my eye was a staircase behind the pulpit, half hidden under a rug. I uncovered it. Stone steps, worn smooth by centuries of use. No lights. I descended anyway. I used my phone flashlight until I reached the bottom, where the signal died. The air was colder than it should have been. My breath fogged instantly. And in that darkness, I heard something impossible. Latin chanting. But not recorded. Not echoing. Close. I moved toward the sound, passing cells carved from rock. Each one had chains on the walls, remnants of cloth, bones scattered in corners. The singing grew louder. At the end of the corridor was a door with 9 locks. And someone had opened 8. The 9th was cracked. I hesitated. But then, the singing stopped. I opened the door. Inside was a chamber lined with red candles. At its center, on a stone bed, sat a man in tattered robes. His beard was long, streaked with ash. His collar, a vivid crimson, was frayed and stained. He opened one eye. Pale. Cloudy. Ancient. "You're late," he said. "Your father Vero." He smiled. Was. I wanted answers, but the air thickened like molasses. He raised a trembling hand and gestured for me to sit. "They will come for you," he said. "They always do after the 25th year. That's when the mark ripens." The mark. He pointed at my neck. I touched it, and felt warmth. He explained, I wasn't just born marked. I was born inhabited. Not possessed, not infected. Inhabited. My soul shared space with something older than demons. Something Vatican records call the Abyssal Second, a force that emerges once every few generations, inhabiting those meant to bring spiritual collapse from within. I was a living gate. And I was approaching the age when that gate would open. Father Vero's chamber felt like it existed outside time. No phone signal, no echoes, not even the drip of water. Just silence. Ancient, deliberate silence. He motioned to a small wooden chest beside his stone seat. I opened it cautiously, expecting more cryptic relics or parchments. But what I found shook me. Inside was a folded cloth with my baby photo stitched into the center. My eyes were shut, and my skin looked paler than I remembered from old family albums. Along the border, symbols were embroidered, Latin words interwoven with sigils I'd only seen in Vatican archives. Matteo leaked to me. "This was taken during your black baptism," Vero said. "The rite your father conducted in secret." The church had condemned such rituals, but he believed it was the only way to delay the awakening. I asked him what the baptism did. "It sealed the abyssal influence inside you. Locked it with 7 names. Not God's names, its names. The ones that feed on faith, not the other way around." Then he told me the names were breaking. "One has already cracked," he said. "Another soon will. When all 7 collapse, it will speak, not in dreams, but through you." I tried to recall those voices in my nightmares. Whispers behind mirrors. My own voice reversed. The sound of wings scraping against stone. Vero reached under his robes and handed me a tiny relic wrapped in dark velvet. It was a coin, blackened with age and slightly warm to the touch. On one side was the red tree. On the other, a phrase in Latin, "Noli me tangere." "Do not touch me. This coin will lead you to the others," he said. 7 relics were made when you were born. Each one tied to a name of the abyss. When brought together, they may either suppress or awaken what's inside you. I asked where the others were. "Scattered. Hidden by those who feared what you'd become. 1 in Jerusalem. 1 in the catacombs of Lyon. 1 deep beneath Vatican City itself. But they'll move them if they sense you're looking." Before I could ask anything more, he stood. His bones cracked with the motion. "Go. You don't have time. The Vatican has already noticed your presence. You weren't careful." "How do you know?" He simply looked up. And then I heard it. The bells. Not church bells, warning bells. Low, metallic, vibrating through the ground. The air changed, and the chamber lights flickered. Vero shoved a parchment into my hands and pulled a hidden stone lever behind the altar. A panel in the wall opened. "A tunnel. Run," he said. "Don't look back. Not even once." I didn't. As I climbed through the tunnel and emerged into the old crypt beyond the monastery walls, I heard the stone door slam shut behind me. And then, silence again. Only this time, I knew I wasn't alone. The parchment Father Vero had given me was worn thin and smelled faintly of wax and ash. I unfolded it carefully under the faint light of a street lamp outside the monastery wall. The writing was faded, but still legible, ink etched with purpose. There were 12 names. Not of saints or demons, but people. Real people. Next to each name was a date of birth, and for most, a second date, always ending in tragedy. Car crashes. Unexplained disappearance. Died during routine surgery. Only 2 names didn't have death dates. Mine, and someone called Lucia Verano. A note in the margin caught my attention. Different handwriting. Newer. 2 remain. Both unstable. Extraction or elimination required before 25th birthday. I looked up at the empty road. The air felt tighter. Like someone was watching me from the dark spaces between the trees. There it was again. The number 25. Father Vero had mentioned it. The Vatican's prophecy that those on the list were too dangerous to live past that age. I was 24. My birthday was 6 weeks away. I memorized the only contact detail on the parchment, coordinates scribbled beside Lucia's name. Somewhere near Ravenna. I didn't hesitate. I caught the next train, keeping my head down, changing compartments often, and never staying still too long. The dreams returned stronger that night, as if the thing inside me sensed motion. It whispered about the other relics, the ones scattered across the world. It called them bones of memory. But in Ravenna, things didn't go as expected. The address led me to an abandoned estate surrounded by dense, ivy-choked forest. As I climbed over the rusted gate, I saw that the front door had already been forced open. The glass panes were shattered from the inside. Inside the estate was chaos. Books torn apart, papers burned in piles. Someone had tried to erase something fast. But one photograph had survived. It was old. Black and white. A girl, maybe 17, standing beside a priest. Both smiling faintly, but there was a hollowness in their eyes. On the back of the photo, a single phrase had been scrawled, "She speaks without moving her lips." I heard a creak, then a whisper. "I hoped you'd come," said a voice from the shadows of the staircase. Lucia Verano stepped into the light. She was older now, maybe my age, her eyes sharp with paranoia but burning with clarity. She held a lantern in one hand and what looked like a consecrated dagger in the other. "They'll be here soon," she said. "And if they find us together, they'll kill us both. Because we're not just on the list." I asked her what she meant. She stepped closer. "We are the list." Lucia led me through the back corridors of the ruined estate, her movements swift but deliberate. She knew every creaking floorboard, every draft in the wall. It felt like the house itself was holding its breath. In a hidden cellar beneath the wine vault, we came to a makeshift sanctuary. No crosses or icons, just a circular table covered in manuscripts, maps, and relic fragments. Candles burned low in iron sconces. The air smelled of dust and parchment, but something else too, copper and incense. Lucia pointed to a tattered map of Europe, marked with strange glyphs. "We were born on the same day," she said, tracing a symbol near Rome. "At the same hour. Different hospitals. Different names. But they marked us both." I looked at the mark she drew, an ancient sigil I had seen only once before. In a childhood dream. A dream where something burned itself into my skin, though I woke with no scar. It was a circle flanked by mirrored keys, the same design carved into the floor of the Vatican's forbidden archive. Lucia noticed my silence. "You've seen it, haven't you?" I nodded. My voice cracked. "Not just in dreams." Lucia placed a book before me, bound in worn red leather and sealed with 2 latches. When she opened it, the pages shimmered faintly. It was written in multiple languages: Latin, Syriac, Greek. I recognized a few phrases from my father's notes, from the edges of the exorcism prayers he never wanted me to read. Lucia flipped to a page marked with a black ribbon. "They called us the Sigillum Gemini, twins of the seal. It's not a metaphor. The Church believes each of us holds half of something dangerous. A force older than angels. Something that once tore through heaven's veil." She lifted her shirt slightly, revealing a faint glowing mark near her ribs. It pulsed like a heartbeat. I didn't believe it either, not at first. But they started following me. Priests without names. Men in robes who don't speak. And then I stopped aging. I stared at her. She looked exactly 25. But she'd shown me her documents. She should have turned 30 last March. Lucia looked at me carefully. "They're afraid we'll reunite. That something will unlock if we do. That we'll remember what we were meant to forget." I whispered the question that had haunted me since the train ride. "Why us?" She answered without hesitation. "Because we're not human. Not entirely." Before I could respond, the lantern flickered violently. The candlelight dimmed. Something was wrong. Lucia moved fast, grabbing the dagger and pushing a loose stone in the wall. A section slid open. Another tunnel. "They've found the house." I followed her into the darkness. The last thing I saw was the sigil burning faintly on the stone wall behind us, like it had been waiting. We ran through the hidden tunnel, the air growing colder with each step. The stone beneath us was uneven, worn by time and water. Every now and then, we'd pass rusted torches embedded into the walls, none lit, but all recently touched, as though someone else had come this way before us. Lucia didn't speak. She just kept moving forward, guided by memory or instinct, I couldn't tell. My thoughts spiraled. The mark. The prophecy. The idea that something inside me, inside us, had never belonged to this world. After what felt like an hour, the tunnel widened into a narrow crypt. Statues lined both walls, hooded figures with blank faces carved in white marble. At the end of the hall, a circular pedestal held a single scroll encased in glass. Lucia stepped toward it. Her voice, finally, broke the silence. "This is what they built the tunnel around. The original Lista Informorum, the list of the unborn. I walked closer. The scroll was ancient, the parchment a deep yellow, crumbling at the edges. Written in Latin, the names were delicate but sharp, like someone had carved each letter with a knife rather than ink. "It's older than the Church," she continued. "Older than Rome. It was once called the binding of the breath. Every name on here was chosen, filtered, for deletion." "Deletion?" I asked, confused. "Souls that weren't meant to enter this world. Spirits too ancient, too volatile, or too aware. They believe if even one survives beyond the appointed age, the balance of power shifts." I leaned closer and saw my name. Theo Carver. It was there, just below another that made my breath stop. Lucia Merelli. Lucia pressed her hand against the glass. The glow from her mark grew stronger, and I felt the same fire stir beneath my ribs. My own sigil responded, pulsing in sync with hers. "They thought separating us would stop the awakening," she said. "But it only delayed it." Something stirred behind us. The statues began to hum, a low, vibrating note like a massive tuning fork. Their mouths opened, revealing hollow voids. One by one, the crypt began to darken. The stone floor trembled. Lucia grabbed the scroll, the glass shattering as she pulled it free. The vibration grew louder, echoing in our bones. "They're coming through," she said. "The Keepers." "Who are the Keepers?" I asked. "Guardians of the list. They erase what doesn't belong." I grabbed her arm, and we ran again, up another flight of stairs that led into a forgotten chapel. The doors were splintered, the stained glass shattered long ago. Outside, the night was ink-black and silent. But I could sense them, watchers in the trees, eyes that blinked without light. Lucia clutched the scroll tightly. "They'll hunt us now. Not because we're dangerous, but because we've begun to remember." The moon lit the field ahead of us in cold silver. We didn't stop. Not yet. We didn't sleep. We couldn't. The forest around us breathed like a living thing, groaning as if ancient roots stirred just beneath the surface. I had grown up thinking nightmares were made up, but now they had names, history, and a list. Lucia led us through the hills to a derelict monastery known only in whispers, the Church of the First Seal. It had been built long before the Vatican rose to power, a black stone structure that looked burned into the landscape rather than built upon it. As we approached, the air thickened. My ears rang with the sound of old prayers I had never learned but somehow understood. Inside, frescoes covered the walls, images of angels with closed mouths and eyes like wounds. They held scrolls, and beneath them were people reaching upward, screaming in silence. In the center of the hall was a dais, and upon it, a strange object floated, a metallic sphere impossibly old, covered in inscriptions that looked like they shifted when you blinked. Lucia took a slow breath. "This is the anchor," she said. "It keeps the list bound in this world. Without it, the scroll would dissolve. The Keepers would lose their grip." I reached out, but before I touched it, a presence filled the hall. My hands trembled. I heard the voices again, the ones from my dreams, but this time they weren't whispers. They were instructions. "Don't let it be unbound," one voice hissed. "But don't let them hold it either." I staggered back. Lucia caught me. "They're inside you now," she whispered. "You can hear both sides. You're not like the others. You were marked not just for deletion, but for replacement." "Replacement?" I asked. She nodded. "The Church wasn't afraid of what you would become. They feared what would come through you." I wanted to scream. My body felt like a cage, and something inside was knocking on the bars. Lucia placed the scroll beneath the sphere. The writing shimmered, reacting to the proximity. The sphere pulsed like a heartbeat. Just then, we heard footsteps outside. Slow, methodical, heavy. Lucia moved quickly. She reached into her coat and pulled out a thin book wrapped in leather, one I'd seen in my father's study. I hadn't realized until that moment how connected all of this truly was. My father had hidden knowledge. He had known this day would come. "It's a cipher," she said, handing it to me. A map to what they're really hiding. Names that were erased long ago, but not forgotten. The doors burst open. 3 figures stepped in, dressed in robes too dark to be cloth. Their faces were veiled in gold, and in their hands they held relics, not weapons, but instruments. One held a censer burning black smoke. Another a staff made of twisted bone. The last held a mirror. They didn't speak. They simply raised their relics and pointed them toward us. Lucia turned to me and whispered, "This is where the list ends, or begins again." The robed figures didn't move closer. They simply stood, frozen like statues carved from night. The one holding the mirror stepped forward just enough for the firelight to catch its surface. But the mirror didn't reflect our faces. Instead, it shimmered with moving script, names, hundreds of them, scrolling as if alive. My name was among them. Lucia stepped between me and the mirror, shielding me with her body. The one with the censer swung it gently, and a thick plume of black smoke drifted toward us. I coughed, dizzy. My vision pulsed in and out, and I heard children crying, church bells ringing, languages I had never heard but somehow understood. The third figure with the staff raised it and drew a circle in the air. The frescoes on the walls reacted instantly. The eyes of the angels began to bleed. The scroll on the dais rolled open on its own, pages fluttering as if caught in wind, though the air was still. Lucia gritted her teeth. "They're trying to rewrite the seal," she said, "to make the list permanent. If they succeed, not only you but everyone like you will be erased. Not killed. Not hunted. Just never born." The anchor began to hum, vibrating with a pitch too high for human hearing. My skull felt like it would crack. I clutched the cipher book she'd given me, and the moment my fingers touched the center page, something opened in me, like a window in my mind had been unlocked. I saw the list. Not just the names, but the meanings behind them. Every name represented a soul that threatened the order, not because of evil or rebellion, but because they were anomalies in a world designed for control. One name glowed brighter than the others. Anselma. I whispered it aloud. The mirror shattered. The figure holding it screamed, or tried to, but no sound came. Instead, blood poured from behind its golden veil, and it fell backward into the smoke, vanishing like a dream. Lucia turned to me, eyes wide. "What did you say?" "Anselma," I repeated. "It's the name of the one they couldn't contain." She looked at the cipher again and flipped it open. On the last page was a drawing, crude but clear. A woman standing over a cracked Vatican seal, eyes weeping fire, her hands holding both a rosary and a dagger. She was the first. The original, too dangerous to be born. A deep rumble echoed through the hall. The anchor trembled. The list caught fire, but the flames didn't consume it. They revealed more names, hidden under the first layer. Lucia whispered, "You're not just on the list. You're her heir." The remaining 2 robed figures began to chant. The circle drawn in the air started to glow. Something was coming through it. Lucia grabbed my hand. "We have to run." But I didn't move. I stared into the circle, and for the first time in my life, I remembered something I had never experienced. A memory that didn't belong to me. The memory slammed into me like a floodgate bursting open. I wasn't just remembering Anselma. I was reliving her final moments. She stood in a chamber almost identical to the one I was in, her arms outstretched, surrounded by 12 cardinals in ceremonial robes. Her mouth bled from reciting a forbidden rite. The Vatican's anchor, much younger then, hovered behind her like a chained god. She was alone, betrayed, radiating a strange energy that defied everything the Church could comprehend. As I watched through her eyes, I realized what they had feared. It wasn't her power. It was her knowledge of what the Vatican truly kept sealed, an entire bloodline built not from sin, but resistance. Resistance to control. Resistance to false prophecy. Her crime wasn't sorcery. It was truth. Lucia shook me violently. "You're not Anselma. Snap out of it. If you stay in her memory too long, you'll disappear into it." But it wasn't that simple. The memory had fused to me. I was her, in part. The moment I spoke her name, whatever was dormant in my blood had activated. I understood now why the Vatican list existed. It wasn't a punishment. It was a containment protocol. And I was breaking it. Behind us, the two remaining robed figures merged into the glowing circle. From the light emerged a new form, massive, winged, draped in white that looked like rotting silk. It had no face, only a gold ring embedded where a head should have been, spinning slowly. Lucia gasped. They summoned a throne. I stared at her. A what? A celestial enforcer. Third sphere. They don't just kill, they unmake. The anchor cracked again, its halo dimming. The seal under our feet shifted, trying to rewrite itself. I saw Latin characters flickering into view, only to dissolve like wet ink. The ritual was failing. I knew what had to be done. I stepped forward, raising the cipher book. Lucia tried to stop me. You'll burn if you speak her full name. I nodded. Then maybe that's the price. I opened the book and recited the final verse. The moment the last syllable left my mouth, the throne paused midair. The spinning ring around its neck began to slow. The Vatican seal on the ground shattered like old porcelain. The light vanished. Silence. Lucia was on the ground, covering her ears. The anchor stopped humming. The parchment list curled up, blank. Not burned. Not destroyed. Reset. I stood in the silence, feeling the last embers of Anselma's memory dissolve from my mind. But something had been left behind. Lucia stood up, dazed. What did you just do? I looked at her and said the words that didn't feel like mine. I took her place. The chamber had changed. Where once there had been cold marble and arcane symbols, there was now something more organic. The walls pulsed slightly, like the inside of a great living thing. The Vatican chamber was no longer just a room. It was a vessel, and it had accepted me as its new anchor. Lucia's voice trembled. You really did it. You reset the seal. But if that's true, you're marked now. You're not a danger to the list anymore. You are the list. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My mouth tasted of copper and dust. Every part of me felt heavier, not physically, but historically, like I was now carrying a lineage that spanned centuries. I had the memories of a woman who died long before my birth. Her name was burned into my mind, deeper than instinct, deeper than blood. I stumbled forward and placed my hand on the altar. It was still warm from the ritual. When my fingers touched the surface, a panel clicked open beneath it. Inside, I found a key. Simple, iron, rusted. Lucia leaned forward, almost whispering. That's the key to the vault under Section E of the Vatican Crypt Library. They call it the womb. That's where they keep the sealed births. The ones they feared might survive. The ones like you. Suddenly, the silence broke. The lights flickered and then dimmed to a deep amber. A voice echoed from the stone, calm and inhuman. Anchor has shifted. Primary containment compromised. Watchers initiating motion protocol. Lucia's eyes widened. They're awake. Who? I asked. The Watchers. They've been dormant since the last purge. Agents of the inverted order. They don't work for the Pope. They work for something older. I turned the key over in my hands. I didn't know what the womb was, but it sounded like the next step in a puzzle I had no choice but to solve. Lucia pointed toward a spiral staircase that had just revealed itself in the corner. That goes down into the deep vaults. If we go, we don't come back the same. I think I already crossed that line, I said. Before we could move, a pulse ran through the chamber. From the corners of the ceiling, shapes began to emerge. Not flesh, not spirit, but something in between. Pale bodies wrapped in scripture, mouths sewn shut with golden thread, wings not feathered but etched with ink. Lucia whispered, "They're already here." We ran. Down the staircase. Into the dark. Toward the womb. toward the place where the Vatican buried its worst fears. Not demons, not witches, but people like me, who were never meant to be born. The staircase narrowed the deeper we went, as if it were swallowing us. The walls were engraved with names, tens of thousands, some scratched out, some glowing faintly in red. The Vatican hadn't simply kept a list of those too dangerous to be born. It had archived them. Names that were never meant to exist, etched into the foundations of the church itself. Lucia's lantern flickered, casting long shadows that twisted with each step. "This place is older than the Vatican," she whispered. "Older than Rome. They just built the church on top of it to keep it buried." "What is this really?" I asked. She looked at me with a grim smile. "A nursery of impossibilities." At the bottom, we reached a circular chamber, vast, hollow, and humming with quiet energy. In the center stood a stone obelisk, chained on all four sides by iron links that pulsed with divine sigils. Around the edges were cradles, hundreds of them, each carved from black marble. Some were empty. Some weren't. I approached the obelisk. My name was there, freshly etched. Below it was a date. Tomorrow's. Lucia stepped back. "That's when the Watchers complete their purge. It doesn't matter that you survived past 25. The system recalibrates. Can it be undone? Maybe. But only by unbinding the obelisk. That's where they keep the names alive. As long as the names are stored, they can still be hunted." My fingers hovered over the first chain. "And if I break it?" "You don't just erase the list," she said. "You erase the Vatican's memory of it. Every ritual, every warning, every cleansing, forgotten. The Watchers become blind." I hesitated. If I did this, I wouldn't just be saving myself. I'd be releasing thousands of unborn stories, souls who had been denied existence by a belief that they were too dangerous to live. But I'd also be destroying the last record of the Church's darkest operations. No one would believe it. Not without evidence. Then I saw it. A journal, sealed in wax, lodged in the base of the obelisk. Its spine bore the same mark that had been on my birth certificate, the Trinity torn in half. I opened the first page. "This is the final confession of Father Alaric, keeper of the unborn list." It was proof. Names, dates, decisions. How the Church had identified bloodlines they believed were cursed, how they had infiltrated hospitals, orphanages, even governments. How they had used prophecy to justify murder. I took the journal, pocketed it, and placed both hands on the chains. They burned instantly, but I didn't let go. My vision blurred. My heartbeat slowed. I heard screams, some ancient, some unborn. The chains broke. The obelisk cracked. The chamber began to tremble, and the names started to vanish, one by one, from the walls. Lucia dragged me out as the stone collapsed inward, like a memory being erased. The Watchers stopped at the edge of the stairs. They turned to dust. We emerged into Rome before sunrise. The city was silent. The Vatican bells didn't ring that morning. And for the first time in centuries, the list was gone. But I wasn't. And now, the world will have to remember the things the Church chose to forget.